Montana Territory, July 1883. The stagecoach rattled over the dry, rutted road as the sun beat down on the wide, empty land. Miles McAllister squinted from beneath the brim of his hat, reins loose in his calloused hands, dust settling on his shoulders. He had not planned to be at the station today, but something had tugged at him. Something had felt off since sunup. The coach rocked to a stop beside the weathered depot. No one else waited. Just him, his horse tied nearby, and the wind whispering through the grass. The driver hopped down, opened the door, and out stepped a woman. She wore a simple traveling dress, the hem dust-caked and wrinkled from the long ride. Her gloved hands trembled slightly as she held a battered carpet bag. Her face was pale beneath the bonnet, but her eyes were steady, dark, and searching. Miles stood still. The woman turned to the driver. "Is Mr. Levi Hammond here?" The driver tugged off his hat. "Ma'am, I do not know how to tell you this, but Mr. Hammond left town 3 weeks ago, sold his land and lit out for California. Said he was not waiting around for no wife." She blinked. Her fingers tightened on the bag. "But I have letters. He said to come. He promised a home." The driver shook his head, apologetic, and turned away. Miles stepped forward, slow and sure. "Ma'am." She looked up. Her face did not crumble. She did not cry. But her lips parted like she had forgotten how to breathe. "My name's Miles McAllister. I've got a ranch 20 miles north. You cannot stay out here alone. Let me take you in just till you figure what you want to do." She hesitated, glancing back at the empty road, then at the sky, as if trying to make a decision that already made itself. "I have nowhere else to go," she said softly. "Then it is settled." He reached for her bag. Their hands brushed, and she flinched, not from fear, he thought, but from being touched after too long without it. "What is your name?" he asked. "Orianna Clarke." He nodded once, then led her to his horse and buggy. She followed, quiet and composed, though her shoulders were stiff with worry. They rode in silence for a while, the wheels crunching over dry grass, wind tossing her curls from beneath the bonnet. Miles did not speak until his land came into view: open fields, a red barn, a sturdy log house tucked close to a stand of cottonwoods. "It is not much," he said. Orianna looked at it, then said, "It looks like it belongs to someone steady." His throat tightened a little, but he only nodded. Inside, the air was cooler. The house smelled like pine and coffee grounds. He showed her the spare room, clean and simple. She set her bag down on the bed, then hesitated in the doorway. "I should tell you something," she said, eyes down. Miles looked at her, brow furrowed. "I am expecting a baby." The words dropped like river stones. He stood still a moment, then stepped back to give her more space. "I see," he said. She looked up quickly. "I understand if that changes things. I only need a place for a few days. I can work. I can sew, clean. I will not be a burden." Miles looked at her, really looked. Her eyes were tired but steady. Her back was straight, her voice even. She was not asking for pity. She was just trying to survive. "You are not a burden," he said simply. "You are welcome here, both of you." Something in her face cracked, just a little. Not tears, but her shoulders sagged slightly, like she had been holding up the weight of the world and could finally let some of it down. That night, she helped cook supper. She peeled potatoes while he salted the meat. They moved around each other like two people trying not to disturb the quiet. Afterward, he built a fire and she sat nearby, stitching at a small tear in her sleeve. He glanced over. "How far along?" "For months." He nodded. "You feeling all right?" She nodded. "Tired mostly. But it has been a rough few weeks." He held her gaze. "You will not have to run anymore." She looked at him, and something flickered across her face: hope, then fear, then nothing again. "I will not stay long," she said. "You stay as long as you need." She looked down at the fire. "Thank you." He tipped his head, then turned his eyes back to the flames. In the days that followed, Orianna found rhythm. She cleaned the porch, helped with meals, watered the garden. She kept to herself, but she laughed once when a curious chicken chased her across the yard, and Miles caught the sound like it was something rare and valuable. He started coming in earlier from the fields, just to see if she needed anything, just to hear her voice. One evening, after supper, she stood by the window, watching the sun dip low. "I used to think my life would be more than this," she said softly. Miles stepped beside her. "What did you want?" She shook her head. "A home. A man who would stay. A place for my baby to be safe." "You can still have that," he said. She turned her eyes to him, surprised. He held her gaze. "You are not alone anymore." Orianna looked at him for a long moment, then walked to the kitchen without a word. But her steps were slower, thoughtful. That night, he could not sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking of her quiet strength. The way she folded her hands over her belly when she thought no one was looking. The way she had started humming while hanging laundry behind the house. She was not a woman broken. She was a woman bent, not bowed. And he wanted to be the man who helped her stand. The next day, he rode into town for supplies. When he returned, she was sitting on the porch, rubbing her back. "You should not be lifting the wash," he said gently. "I was not. Just hanging it." He stepped beside her, handed her a small parcel. She opened it slowly. Inside, a pair of tiny knitted booties. Her fingers trembled. "I saw them in town," he said. "Figured the baby would need something warm come winter." She looked up at him, eyes wide. "No one has ever bought something like this for me." "Well, they have now." She smiled then. A real one. Soft and warm, and it hit him in the chest like a kick. "Thank you, Miles." He swallowed. "You are welcome, Orianna." As the sun set, she stayed beside him on the porch, the booties in her lap. Neither of them moved. They sat in the fading light, the silence between them no longer heavy. And Miles knew something had already changed. Not just in his house, in his heart. Orianna's hands were wet with dishwater when the knock came. She dried them on her apron, glancing toward the door as if uncertain whether to answer it. Miles had taken the wagon out before dawn to mend a fence line along the west pasture. He wouldn't be back until late afternoon. The knock came again, firmer this time. She opened the door partway, enough to see a boy not yet out of his teens, pale and freckled, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Beggin' pardon, ma'am," he said, eyes flicking past her into the house. "Mr. McAllister said to bring this up to the house." He held out a wooden crate, heavy enough to make his thin arms tremble. Orianna stepped aside. "Set it just there, by the stove." He did, then straightened and wiped his brow with a dusty sleeve. "What is it?" He looked at her, surprised. "Missus, it's beeswax, tallow, and a few pounds of barley. Said you'd know what to do with it." "I see," she said, though she didn't. The boy lingered, clearly unsure if he should leave. She tilted her head. "Did Miles send you up from town?" He nodded. "Yes'm. Said you'd be needing a few more things here and there. Asked if I'd run errands for you if he's out working." Orianna folded her hands. "And what do you want for it?" He blinked. "Nothin', ma'am. Just said to come Tuesdays and Fridays. Said you'd feed me if I was late." She looked at the boy, skinny, alert, likely no one waiting for him anywhere. "What's your name?" "Eli Hargrove." She nodded. "Thank you, Eli. There's a biscuit left from breakfast. Warm it by the fire before you go." He brightened. "Yes, ma'am." She watched him eat, quiet and careful, hunched like someone who'd been scolded for being hungry too many times. Later, after he'd gone, she opened the crate and sorted through the supplies. A small wrapped package sat nestled between the barley sacks. Inside, 2 bars of lye soap and a sheet of lavender-dyed muslin. She ran her fingers over it, slow and uncertain. When Miles came home, dirt streaked to his elbows and his shirt clinging damp to his back, she was sitting at the table, needle in hand, the muslin already cut and pinned. "I hope you don't mind," she said without looking up. "I started a nightgown. It's too fine for everyday use." He set his hat on the peg and stepped closer. "It's for you. Use it how you like." She nodded, then paused, glancing up. "Eli stopped by. Said he'd come again Friday. I figured you might need help now and then. He's a good boy." She returned her attention to the fabric. He's polite. Miles dragged a chair back and sat, brushing sawdust from his trousers. You ever do much sewing? My mother was a seamstress in Springfield. Taught me early. He watched her hands move, precise and practiced. You miss it. She hesitated, then gave a small shrug. I miss knowing what tomorrow looks like. He leaned back, arms crossed. You can have that again. She didn't answer, but he saw the faintest shift in her shoulders, like the words had landed somewhere she hadn't expected them to. The next morning brought a sharp wind from the north. Leaves scratched against the windows and the sky hung low and dark. Orianna built the fire high and spent most of the day inside, mending one of Miles's shirts and boiling a chicken for supper. She was kneeling by the hearth when he came in, boots muddy, hair mussed from the wind. Storm's coming, he said, pulling off his coat. She stood and brushed ash from her skirt. I can feel it in my back. He looked toward her, concerned. You all right? She nodded. Just sore. It'll pass. He didn't press, but after supper, he took a bucket out to the well and brought back warm water without asking. She found it waiting in the wash basin with a folded cloth beside it. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, then moved to sit at the edge of the bed. Her hands trembled slightly as she dipped the cloth and pressed it to her lower spine. A knock came at the doorframe. I can leave you be, Miles said, voice low. She didn't look up. No, it's all right. He stepped in, then hesitated. You want help? She took a breath. If you don't mind. He crossed the room, crouched behind her, and took the cloth. His touch was careful, light as wind across tall grass. She closed her eyes. Tell me if it's too much, he said. It's not. They stayed that way for a while, the fire crackling behind them, his hand steady against the curve of her back. My husband, she began, then stopped. Miles didn't move. He wasn't cruel, just careless. He promised things he never meant to keep. He said nothing, just folded the cloth again and pressed it gently to her side. I don't expect anything from you, she said. I know, he answered, but I don't want to be looked at like I'm broken. You're not. She turned slightly, met his eyes. You really believe that? I wouldn't have brought you here if I didn't. She didn't speak again, but when he stood to leave, she caught his sleeve, just for a second, just enough to make him stop. Thank you, she said. He nodded once, then stepped out, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. That night, the wind howled through the grasslands, but inside the house, it was warm, and for the first time in weeks, Orianna slept through until morning. The wild roses began to open in late July, pale pink against the dry golden hills, and with them came long afternoons stretched thin with heat. The air hung quiet over the land except for the cicadas and the creak of wood as the house settled into the day. Orianna stood barefoot in the kitchen, kneading dough with slow, steady effort. Her face was flushed, a damp strand of hair stuck to her temple. The baby had begun to shift more often, a flutter at first, now a rolling push beneath her ribs that stole her breath when she leaned too far forward. Miles came in without ceremony, hat in hand, his shirt damp at the collar. He set a coiled rope on the bench and looked toward her. I passed the midwife's boy on the trail. He said she's back from Deer Lodge. Orianna wiped her hands on the flour sack towel. I'd like to meet her. If she's willing to come all the way out here, she will be. I'll ride over tomorrow. She hesitated, then turned back to the dough. You've done more than you had to. Miles leaned against the doorframe, hands loose at his sides. I don't measure things that way. She didn't answer. Her hands moved with practiced rhythm, and for a while the only sound was the dough slapping against the board. That evening, she walked beyond the barn where the land fell into a shallow draw thick with cottonwoods. The breeze had risen, cooling the sweat at her neck. She sat on a flat rock, the same one Miles had pointed out as a good place to watch the deer come to drink. Her hands rested on the curve of her stomach. Miles found her there just before dusk, holding a small sprig of yarrow between her fingers. He didn't speak, just sat beside her, boots scuffing the dirt. She finally said, "I used to think I'd raise this child in a boarding house. Or worse. You won't. I know that now. But there was a time I was sure no one would want us. You're wanted." She looked at him, eyes narrowed slightly, not out of anger but the sharpness of disbelief. "You don't even know me. I know enough. You don't scare easy. You work hard even when no one's watching. And I've seen how you talk to that child like it's already here." She turned away, lips pressed tight. But he saw her shoulders ease. He added, "I don't say things I don't mean. I've learned not to trust words. I'm not asking you to trust mine. I'm asking you to keep sitting beside me until you believe them." She didn't walk away. Didn't speak either. But she stayed long after the sun dipped behind the ridge and the sky turned that deep blue the stars favor. The next morning, Miles left early. Orianna watched from the porch, arms folded around herself until he disappeared down the ridge trail. She spent the day putting up beans, the canning kettle hissing on the stove, jars lined like soldiers on the windowsill to cool. By the time the buggy wheels crunched into the yard, the wind had picked up again. Miles stepped down, then helped a woman in a faded gray cloak from the seat. She was older than Orianna expected, with a lined face and eyes that missed nothing. "This is Mrs. Greaves," Miles said. Orianna nodded, wiping her palms on her apron. "Come in. The kettle's still warm." Inside, the midwife removed her gloves and sat by the hearth, watching Orianna move around the room. "You've carried before?" "No, ma'am. You'll carry fine. You've got hips meant for it and a good color to your skin." Orianna flushed but said nothing. Mrs. Greaves leaned forward, pulled a small pouch from her bag. "You'll start drinking this in the evenings. Steep it slow. Helps with the swelling and keeps your blood from turning sluggish." Miles stepped outside to tend the horses, leaving the two women alone. The midwife's voice softened. "He's steady. You're lucky." Orianna looked up sharply. "I'm not his wife." "Not yet." Something in Orianna's face shifted. "I don't know if I can be." Mrs. Greaves stood, smoothing her skirts. "You don't have to decide that today. But don't let fear talk louder than your heart." When the midwife left, Miles lingered by the porch while Orianna gathered the spent tea leaves into the hearth ash. "She say anything I should know?" She said I'd do fine. He nodded. She's not one to flatter. The quiet between them stretched, but not in the way it used to. It held something warmer now. Orianna stepped out to the porch, leaned a hand on the post. "There's a fair in town next week." Miles raised an eyebrow. "You want to go?" "I think I do." He smiled, not wide, just enough to crease the corner of his mouth. "Then we'll go." She looked out across the field where the wheat was starting to ripen, the heads bowing heavy with promise. "I don't want to keep waiting for my life to begin." "You don't have to." She looked at him, then really looked, and something settled behind her eyes. Not certainty, not yet. But something close. Something that could grow. He didn't touch her. Didn't ask for anything. Just stood beside her as the wind moved across the land and the sun slipped beneath the clouds in a blaze of orange. And for the first time, she didn't feel like someone who'd been left behind. She felt like someone who'd been found. The fair filled the center of town with horses tied 3 deep along the posts, the air thick with the smell of molasses and sun-warmed dust. Orianna stepped down from the wagon slowly, one hand braced on the seat rail, the other resting low on her belly. Her dress, let out again that morning, strained just slightly at the seams as she took careful steps onto the packed earth. Miles walked beside her, close enough to steady her if she needed, but without hovering. He wore his cleaner shirt, sleeves rolled, the collar still pressed from the iron. They passed a booth of painted crockery, then a man selling penny candy from behind a curtain of buzzing flies. "I haven't been in a crowd like this since before I left Illinois," Orianna said, eyes drifting over the small groups gathered near the bandstand. "You holding up all right?" "I am. Just feels like more world than I'm used to lately." They stopped near a woman selling paper ribbons for the church raffle. Orianna reached into the pocket of her dress, pulled out a small coin, and bought 2. Miles raised a brow. "Feeling lucky?" She glanced at the ribbon in her hand. Not exactly. Just thought it might be time to hope for something small. They wandered past the livestock pens where the smell of hay and manure hung thick and familiar. Miles paused at a stall where a man showed off a new harness rig, and Orianna stepped aside to give him space to talk. As she waited, a voice behind her said, "Excuse me, Mrs. That you, Orianna Clarke?" She turned, careful and slow. A woman stood there, hat pinned too high, a narrow squint to her eyes. Her accent placed her somewhere east of the Mississippi. "I thought it might be. I'm Lydia Weatherby. My cousin knew your sister back in Springfield." Orianna nodded, polite but guarded. "It's been a long while. I'd heard you were headed out west to marry. Didn't expect to see you again." Miles glanced over, sensing the shift in air. Orianna's voice stayed even. "Plans changed." Lydia's eyes dropped to Orianna's middle, then back up, wider now. "Good heavens. Well, I suppose life turns strange sometimes, doesn't it?" Miles stepped forward, his hand brushing Orianna's elbow. "Afternoon, ma'am." Lydia blinked, clearly startled. "And you are?" "Miles McAllister." Lydia's mouth opened, then closed. "I see." Orianna turned her head toward him, voice quiet. "I'm ready to move on." They walked away without another word, her hand brushing his sleeve. Neither looked back. Later, they stood near the edge of the grounds where the wind carried the scent of fried apples and the sound of fiddle music floated from the barn. She leaned lightly against the fence rail, watching a pair of children chase each other in circles. "You all right?" Miles asked. "I thought I might feel ashamed seeing someone from before, but I didn't. Not really." He nodded. "I used to think people could take things from me, my worth, my name, my future. But they can't. Not unless I let them." "You didn't let them." "No," she said. "I didn't." He reached into his pocket, drew out a small carved figure, worn smooth along the edges. A horse no taller than her thumb. "I whittled this when I was a boy, carried it in my coat through 2 winters. Meant to give it to a son if I ever had one." Her breath caught. "I want to raise this child with you, Orianna. Not because someone else walked away. Because I'm here. Because I choose you." She took the horse from his hand. Her fingers curved around it, slow and careful. "I don't need a promise on paper," she said. "I just need to know you'll be beside me when the days are long and the nights are harder." He looked her in the eye. "I will be." The music swelled again, and someone called out for a waltz. She didn't move toward it. Neither did he. They stayed there at the edge of everything, the carved horse between them, the dust rising in soft swirls around their boots. And in that moment, neither of them felt like they were standing at the end of something. They felt like they just stepped into the beginning. The first frost came early, curling the garden leaves and whitening the barn roof before dawn. Inside the house, the wood stove crackled low and the air smelled of cinnamon and smoke. Orianna stood at the window in her shawl, watching 2 deer move along the far tree line, their dark shapes barely visible in the morning gray. Behind her, Miles poured water into the kettle, his steps slow to keep from waking the boy in the loft. Since the fair, Eli had started staying some nights, his mother gone to Helena for work, his father long buried. Miles didn't ask questions about the arrangement. He just made room. Orianna turned from the window. "The child's been kicking more often at night. Keeps me awake." Miles set the kettle over the flame. "That mean it's close?" "I think so. Mrs. Greaves said it'll come before the snow stays." He moved toward her, brushing a stray bit of lint from her sleeve. "I've been building the cradle." "I saw it," she said. "You've got a good hand with pine." He let out a small breath. "I keep thinking about what kind of man I'm going to need to be. For you. For the baby. I've lived quiet a long while." "I'm not used to anyone needing me." "You don't have to be anything you're not," she said. "You just have to stay." He looked at her, eyes steady. "I will." That afternoon, she opened the trunk at the foot of her bed and pulled out a letter she hadn't read in months. The paper had yellowed, the ink faint where rain had seeped through the seams of her bag that first day at the depot. She read it again, then folded it back into its envelope and tucked it into the ash pan of the stove, feeding it into the flames without ceremony. Outside, Miles was mending the fence that bordered the north hayfield. She walked to the edge of the porch and called his name, one hand pressed to her side where the baby had settled low. He came up the path, wiping his hands on a rag. "Everything all right?" "I burned the last of the letters." He nodded once, eyes on hers. "I don't want anything unfinished hanging over us," she said. "It was never real. Not like this." He stepped up beside her. "I'm glad you did." By the end of the week, the first snow fell light, dry, and quick to melt, but enough to turn the hills pale under the moon. Eli brought in firewood without being asked and sat by the hearth with a primer book Miles had found in town. Orianna watched him from the rocker, her feet up on a stool, her knitting slow and uneven over her belly. She turned to Miles. "He's a good boy. Smart. He's got an eye for numbers," Miles said. "I was thinking, come spring, I might teach him to keep the ledgers. He'd like that." "He listens to you more than me." She smiled faintly. "He's not used to anyone being gentle with him." Neither of them said what they were both thinking, that the child growing inside her might come into this world with more than one older brother to look out for him. The storm came 3 weeks later, sudden and hard. Wind drove snow against the windows and the sky stayed the color of lead for 2 days straight. On the second night, Orianna woke with a low sound in her throat, her hand gripping the edge of the mattress. Miles stirred instantly. "Tell me." She nodded, breathing through her teeth. "It's starting." He lit the lamp, his fingers shaking just once before he steadied them. "I'll ride for Mrs. Greaves." "No," she said. "Not in this wind. You'd break your neck." He paused. "Then I'll do what you tell me." The hours passed slow, the air thick with heat and tension. Eli stayed in the loft, silent as a shadow, while Miles moved between the stove and the bedroom with hot cloths and water. Orianna didn't cry out, didn't plead, just breathed and bore down and held tight to the edge of the world. When the baby came, the room went still. No sound. Just the soft weight of him in Miles's hands, and then a sharp, living cry that broke the silence clean in two. Orianna's face was wet, her hair plastered to her neck. "Is he?" "He's perfect," Miles said, his voice rough. She reached for the child and Miles laid him in her arms, his tiny fingers already curling. Later, after the fire had burned low and the storm had softened, Miles sat on the edge of the bed, watching her cradle their son. "I've never seen anything so strong," he said. Orianna looked down at the baby, then up at him. "Neither have I." He touched her hand, the one not holding the child. "Will you marry me, Orianna?" She didn't answer right away. Just looked at him, long and full, like she was seeing every part of the man beside her. "Yes," she said. "We already built the life. Might as well give it the name." They married 2 weeks later, quiet and simple, with Mrs. Greaves and Eli as witnesses. Snow still clung to the fence posts, but the sky was clear and the sun lit the fields like promise. Orianna wore a shawl Miles had bought in town, soft wool dyed with indigo. She carried no flowers, just the baby in her arms, swaddled and sleeping. That night, after the dishes were washed and Eli had gone to bed, Miles pulled her close near the fire. "You still feel like you're waiting for life to begin?" he asked. She shook her head. "No. This is it. This is everything." He kissed her then, quiet and sure, and she leaned into him like she'd been meant to all along. Outside, the wind had gone still. Inside, the warmth held steady, and the house felt full not just of bodies, but of belonging. And they never left. The boy grew healthy and strong, with eyes like his mother's and patience like his father's. Eli stayed on, built a life of his own on the neighboring ridge, but always came back Sunday evenings for supper. The land gave back what they planted, and the house never sat empty again. Years passed, but the quiet between Miles and Orianna never turned cold. It deepened, like the roots of the cottonwoods near the draw, sturdy, unseen, but holding everything together. They grew old side by side, not in grand gestures or loud declarations, but in the way she passed him the bread at dinner or the way he touched the small of her back as she walked through the door. They never looked back. They didn't need to.